And we're back with another episode of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale with Don and Kevin. And Kevin, looking good, buddy.
Good afternoon, Don. How are you?
You're good. You got your black shirt on, your white shoes.
I know, right?
You called Chad
Black
to tell me to
pants.
wear his white shoes too.
I sure did.
Why didn't you call me, man?
I know. I wish.
Jeez,
Well, I
I
thought you got
missed
the
it.
white shirt part, the black shirt part.
Well, at least we're together that way.
Yeah.
We're
Always.
aligned, man. That's all there is to it. Hey, we got another great episode today with a good guest, Chad Bays of Scottsdale. Chad is the founder and CEO of Academic Opportunity of Arizona. It's a school tuition organization that provides scholarships and support for K through 12th grade children with disabilities and low income hardships. Since 2016, they've allocated over $24 million in scholarships for students in need through the state's tax credit programs. What an awesome operation you got going, Chad. Congratulations.
Thank you, Don. And kind of wild to hear it read back like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're in our 10th
amazing.
year. So yeah,
Yeah.
pretty wild.
Totally amazing. Before we get into details of your organization, tell us a little bit about you, your background. You grew up here, I think, right? You went to school here, and
Correct. Yes. About me. So I'm a true native,
Right on.
born and raised. So my mother was from Southern California. Father was from the Chicago, Illinois area. They met in ASU in the 70s. And sure enough, you've probably never heard that story before, right? From
Yeah,
Southern
right.
California in the Midwest. And yeah, so I got an older brother. He's 2 years older. He lives in Boston. So he's an ASU alum. I went north. I was the black sheep of the family.
Right.
So I went north to Flagstaff. Quickly paid my dues in the cold for about 4 years and then ran back home after graduation from Flagstaff up there. So if there's any lumberjacks listening,
there's probably a couple out
Jags.
there.
Go
Yeah,
Jags.
there's some Jacks
Go
out
Jags,
there. Yeah.
absolutely.
Everything
So,
in AU.
They're everywhere. Yeah, they're everywhere.
but yeah, so born and raised, my mother was a school teacher here locally. So she taught third grade for about 33
right.
years. She was Paradise Valley School District.
Okay.
So Eagle Ridge,
Okay.
Arrowhead, so
Yeah.
kind of in the North Phoenix, Scottsdale border-ish as well.
Yeah.
So she dabbled all through K through about 6, but really loved third grade. So
Oh,
that's where
great.
she honed in there as well. So yeah,
Is she retired now, or?
unfortunately she passed. So
sorry.
no, you're fine. So she retired at 55.
Okay.
She taught for about 33 years.
Okay.
And then unfortunately got popped with breast cancer, like so many does.
So bad. Sorry to
So
hear that.
retired early and then did the chemo, or did radiation, and then it came back, did the chemo, and unfortunately she passed at 61.
That's way too
So
early.
yeah, very early.
Sure.
Yeah, and
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, no, and it was impactful for me to kind of witness and watch.
Yeah.
And it was actually kind of helped traject kind of where I went from a professional and personal life.
Really?
Kind of helped to where I am now with the foundation and kind of starting
Right.
that and everything as well. So
Yeah, let's catch back up to the story
not to
because
go
when you
too deep into the weeds there with all
Yeah.
that, but,
No, but
yeah,
you-
so education had always hit near and dear
Okay.
to our home as well. growing
but
up.
you when you got out of school, you got in the insurance business for a while, right?
First, yeah, I don't know how do you want to go, but first I was with Pulte Del Webb Homes.
Okay.
So back in 2004, locally here, and really got to see the rise and acceleration of real estate, and then the real explosion of it also.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of unprecedented in terms back there, but an amazing learning experience. Had some great training, some great experience. I was in my mid-20s, working for evolving company. They were just growing, and then unfortunately, got laid off in 2009. And then got into the finance insurance business from there.
So about 10 years ago, I'm going to, since you were inspired, I think I saw that you were inspired to do what you're doing now because of your mom, right?
Correct.
So talk a little bit about your transition from the private sector into the nonprofit world.
Yeah, it was definitely something that if you would have asked me growing up, I never in a million years would have imagined this would have been kind of the journey that I took. But yeah, I had a very small insurance agency in Caroline. We did property casualty and some commercial general liability. So some real fun stuff. Let me tell you, those daily phone calls and interactions. Exactly, Kev, you got it. Yeah, some real sexy stuff, real fun. But had some success in that. And really, as I mentioned earlier to you guys before we speaking, I also sat on the executive council for the Phoenix 2030 Club.
Right.
So I was the community activity
You had
officer
some
there.
nonprofit experience.
I had some nonprofit experience. The club was great. We had 50 guys. We had raised $300,000, $400,000, $500,000.
Yeah.
And as my job as a CAO, it was, okay, these are the initiatives that we want to do, whether it's, take 200 kids to Valley Youth Theater or set up a back to school shopping experience at Kohl's. And they're like, here's our budget, and go to the community and do it. And that's really what kind of connected the dots and opened my eyes. Because as you know, we have an amazing community here, and there's a lot of corporate leaders who want to help, but it's just, how do I help? right? And how do I find the time? So it was make it an easy for them to navigate that process for them to give.
Sure.
So I sat at that position for 3 years within the club, really helped navigate and establish grassroots, which I still believe they're still using close to 15 years later.
Yeah.
Some of those partnerships, those Coles Back to School, I believe they're still utilizing that as
great.
well. So,
Yeah.
So I had that experience there in the nonprofit world. And then on the insurance side, so Arizona is one of about 26 states throughout the nation, last I looked, that has some sort of school scholarship voucher tax credit program. And I know that can be a big buzzword and everything else as well. But being in the insurance world, I knew that tax credit was available. Having my experience from the Phoenix 2030 Club, I was able to connect those dots.
Right.
And that all kind of coincided with the same time when my mother entered hospice and she was on her last legs. So the way that the universe works and the journey that it be, we actually got our 501c3 approval. It took about 1.5 years. So we got that in July of 2014. And my mother ended up passing in August, 30 days later of 2014.
Oh, wow.
So I remember sitting in my office in Scottsdale. I'm notorious for having my yellow legal notepad. And Kev, I just did 61 check marks. I was 32 at the time. And I was just like, if this is the back nine,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
no offense to anybody out there in the insurance world,
Yeah.
but that wasn't for me at that point in time, right? So I figured that there had been something more. So it was a very small book of insurance, but made the decision at that point in time, ended up selling that book of insurance, went live with AOA back in 2014. Brace yourself, gentlemen. I know you're already sitting down, but we raised a grand total of $6,250 our first year.
$6,000.
$6,000. You got it.
Was that for tax credit money? Was it?
That was through the tax credit money, right? And that was a culmination of how competitive the tax credit was.
Yeah.
Because at that point in time, it was a very small limit, and there was a large appetite, if you will, of corporations and individuals who said this makes sense and wanted to donate it as well. So that credit quickly got hit throughout the year.
Let me back up for a second and fill in a gap. Why? What inspired you to take on a mission helping kids with disabilities and economic hardships?
Yeah, so it all kind of hit close to home. So as I mentioned earlier, my mother was a third grade teacher here locally for over 35, 33, 34 years here locally. So education always hit near and dear to our heart, to my heart as well. And I have cousins who, if these programs would have been around, I won't date how old I am, but back in the 90s when I was in elementary school, if they would have had programs that were specifically for children who are living with Down syndrome or living with autism or hearing and vision. I was a public school, right? So it's not a public versus private or anything like that. It's more of an options and choices. Right. So I know in life, I always like to have as many options as possible. I probably go the same route 99% of the time, but it's always nice to have options. So just giving those parents in our community those options. So that's really why we chose that is, once again, growing up with a mother at home. I remember going to teaching schools at 3rd Street in Bell, and she would go buy school supplies, right? Pencils, papers, erasers.
Yeah.
And that was 30, 35 years ago.
Yeah.
And guess what teachers are still doing?
Yep.
The exact same thing.
Yeah.
So it was kind of, how can I make a change on a personal level? Right. And I think as you slowly get older, you realize you probably can't change the world, but there's a little segment and there's a little sandbox where you can. And we turned that $6,250 into over $24.4 million in 10 years. So that sandbox has fantastically grown bigger and bigger in the last 10 years.
Is it all through tax credit or most
All
of it?
through, we solely rely
right?
on corporate and individual tax credits.
Okay.
So did you have family that had disabilities? Was that the passion? Why? Because that's a niche that you chose and a much needed, important niche. But what led you to that niche?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So growing up, I had family
cousins.
Correct. And we all know there were better ways, and we're slowly being able to provide those better ways. And it really just comes down to, like anything, is money, right?
And
the
the
world's
dollars.
greatest common denominator, right? So it's how do we get the proper ratios in the classroom? How do we get the specialized care? And that goes across the board too. So it's not just on the disability side, but it's on all the classroom side as well.
Yeah. That makes sense. So talk a little bit about the operation, how it works, how you're staffed up and, how things are today and how you've grown.
Yeah. Great question. So we're lean and mean. So we say it's the most impactful donation that you can make. So over 90% of every dollar that is donated goes directly back to program. And by program means directly into the classroom. So we allocate scholarships for children who qualify. And I'm using air quotes here. So the state of Arizona basically has about 12 different qualifying categories. So, for example, if you're living with autism or Down syndrome or hearing or vision, and then they have a matrix. Basically, if you're in kindergarten or if you're a 12th grader in high school, and they assign a dollar amount to that. So for all intents and purposes, if you're a senior in high school living with autism, the state is approximately going to allocate approximately about $32,000 that we are able to fund towards that student to go towards a privatized, specialized school that specializes in program just for their needs that are needed. So, for example, we work a lot with Lawrence Institute for Education. They're out in the Gilbert, Southeast Valley as well, but they specialize their program where a student who may need multiple therapies, where the old model would be, okay, you go get your traditional, I'm using air quotes, your traditional education here at school. Then you go to therapy X, therapy Y, and then therapy Z, sometimes once a day, sometimes a couple of times throughout the week. So you're constantly running around.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Exactly. Yeah. So if you got two working parents, it's kind of an impossible situation.
Almost impossible, sure.
Exactly. And then if you have
school does therapies while they're in school,
you got 100%.
Wow.
So what Life does is they encompass everything right on campus.
Right.
So you can imagine what a relief that is to parents to say, okay, I have a one-stop, and I don't want to say a turnkey solution, but it is, where they know they're getting the qualified care that their child needs most, all in a one singular location. So that's the model. That's the new model that they're going to. But as we spoke about earlier, that model is about, the state recognizes it's about $32,000 per year for a high schooler is kind of what the matrix says on that side of it all.
So are you statewide or valley-based?
We're statewide. Yeah. So what makes our STO, what makes Academic Opportunity of Arizona a little bit different, so there's hundreds of STOs. So there's hundreds of organizations just like ours.
Just for our audience, what's an STO?
STOs are acronym for School Tuition Organization.
Okay.
So there's over, I want to say 186 that were last publicly filed as well.
Wow.
Correct. So some of them do far larger dollars than we do. They do some great work, and some of them aren't really measurable. They're just kind of on there to be on there as well. But really what makes us different is our mission. So it's who we choose to serve. So we actually prioritize those students and those kiddos who are living with developmental disabilities. And then I think the second biggest, which has really helped with our corporate donations, is we're non-faith based. So some of the largest STOs here in the Valley are all faith based, which is great. But we don't have an agenda. We don't have an initiative. We serve faith-based schools, but we don't say, okay, we're only going to work with this sector, or we're only going to geographically operate in this part of the Valley. So we work with partner schools throughout Tucson, Flagstaff, Yuma. So throughout our 10 years of organization, we've worked with over 86 schools throughout the state.
Really?
Correct.
It's solid growth, isn't it?
So,
That's amazing. Yeah.
Really, and out of counts really concentrated, right? So some other STOs you're talking about that are faith-based, they probably guide their students to secular type schools then, right?
You said it, not me, but I think there's a common mission, a common faith where it all makes sense for them, which once again, it's back within their sandbox, which, they're playing in.
And you're just focusing on who gives the best care to the kids.
Correct.
Wow.
And the third thing is, top on that is, we're committed to giving 100% of what the state says is available. So what that means is there's other organizations, and we're all doing great, right? We're all doing the best we can, everything else, but what we do is, so for example, we issued over 748 awards this year to the tune of just over $4.7 million.
Wow.
With an average, wow is right, with an average award of just over $6,200 per child.
Okay.
So other organizations may say we helped 10,000 kids.
Yeah.
We gave them all $1,000.
Yeah.
But the real need was $32,000. Right. So then what that does is then they're applying to other organizations.
Yeah. It's piecing it together probably, don't
Correct. So going through this is about my fourth year. After founding this, we've had basically year over year, we doubled our growth. And what that was great on the front end, but what that did on the back end as well is because we weren't steering anybody or guiding anywhere, that they qualified and they met the statutes, and we're getting as much as we could. And also with that guarantee is we had over 4,200 students apply last year.
4,200?
Correct.
Wow.
So that was over $20 million in need. So we had some great growth on the donation side, but on the back end with the students, they're like, hey, this makes sense. I don't have to go to apply to 3 or 4 other organizations. I can apply to just one, right? If you can catch that. So we're constantly trying to play keep up. So it's the good and the bad with the wheel of everything that we're working with.
How do families get connected to you?
All through school base.
Okay.
So a lot of the schools actually, since STOs have been around now since 2009, a lot of the schools actually employ and have some sort of personnel internal where they educate the parents. And then some schools specifically work with other STOs. Once again, we work with all schools. So it's all directly through the school base and parents as well. So parents can go directly to our website, which is aoa360.org.
Okay.
That's where our student applications are. If you're listening and you're like, hey, this makes sense, I want to make a direct impact. We're in individual tax season right now. So if you still haven't filed, you can still actually make a tax credit donation for 2024. Or if you're a corporate listener, if you're a corporate leader, and you're like, hey, we want to get involved as well, you can go to aoa360.org.
How do you determine what students get the help?
Yes. So great question. We prioritize on a need-based and then on when they actually submit the application. Okay. So it's timely. So they go live on March 1st. And that's when we build our list. So you submit a complete application with all the documentation that's needed. If you apply based on the income metrics, so students living with low income hardships, they have to submit tax information and documentation. The state says they'll give you some just approximate numbers. A family of 4 making less than approximately about $85,000 per year would qualify for a scholarship as well. So we collect all that information and then we go down the list as well. So there's no prioritizing. There's no special magic or drawing anything out of hats. If we do it, try and do it as fair as way possible.
The need is always there. I assume you can't do everything to meet all of the need because you got basically your resources. So that must be some tough decisions sometimes when you're looking at who gets it and who does not, right? It's
coming from corporate America, especially the insurance world, right? Which much respect everybody out there, but the phone calls and conversations are much better. Yeah. But that is the most challenging and difficult part is when our team and our parents have to tell the parents, sorry, we don't have the funding. It's not, you don't qualify. It's not, you didn't do anything. And we always tell our team, we say, Jess, Tony, Dan, it's not a you decision. It's not an us decision. It's just, we don't have the funding to do it. So what we do is we try and communicate. As you know, communication is key. So as soon as we can communicate and know, we don't let them sit there and wait for months or weeks or anything like that. We communicate and say, sorry, we can't. You're on a waiting list, but here's some alternative avenues, which would be some other STOs as well.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. I wouldn't want to have to make those kind of decisions.
Are you kidding me?
Wow.
That'd be crazy. So March 1st, thing I start to apply, and when you use a close, and then you start to gather your information and then make an award?
Correct. So our applications are live for 30 days. So March 1st through the end of March. And usually in years past, last year, like I mentioned, we had over 4,200 applications within those 30 days.
Wow.
So what happens is all the parents submit those applications and then our team goes to work. You're in the tech business, so we've got a great operations team. So we embrace as much tech as possible, but you still need human eyes to scrub everything to make sure that the tax forms match up, right? The dollar amounts match up, that all the codes match up and everything else as well. So we have to filter and scrub all those applications.
Really?
And they're all timestamped. So we're paperless. So we don't, old school, they used to mail them in and then you have to fill everything in. He's laughing already.
Yeah. Exactly. I go back that far.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So you have a small team then? Or?
We have a small team. We're 5 total.
Are you really?
Yeah.
You guys are impactful then.
We're very impactful, and that's what our donors love to hear too, because back to that 90%. And one other thing that I left out there is we go above and beyond as well than what other STOs. And this is something that was a personal choice that I made. And I laugh and I say this because I was a C student. You've heard, I wasn't the project potential, the A student always answering in the front of the class. I was in the back causing trouble. But as soon as recess hit or we had a field trip or something outside the classroom, that's kind of where I had my fun and excelled and everything else as well, right?
We were actually kind of alike that way, you and me. So I get it.
Just
well, 3 of us right here.
We're on the same boat. We're on the same boat.
Guy was too.
I was a solid C student as well.
Yeah.
There's no shame. There's no shame in that, right? So, but it was really about giving the kids opportunity. So a lot of especially on the disability displaced side, and then on the low income side, there's just not a lot of opportunity. They're either a lot of their time is consumed with doctor's appointments, therapies, kind of running around, or on the low income side, unfortunately, a lot of it's coming from a single parent household. So for them to get involved and do something extracurricular, it's not in the cards. It's not a realistic option, right? So what we've done is we're actually the preferred STO choice of Arizona Science Center and Special Olympics Arizona.
No kidding.
So we actually and we're the only organization that I know that does this is kind of out of our admin budget. And what we do, it's called our AOA 360 initiatives. So we actually just hosted over 218 kiddos 2 weeks ago down at Arizona Science Center. And they range from Lawrence Institute, where they brought their kids. And one of the feedback that we got from the administrators at that school was a big thank you And to paraphrase, it was our parents never felt comfortable taking their kids to the science center because they didn't know the reaction.
Sure.
So being able to go there collectively as a group in a unified manner was life-changing. Because a lot of those kids, exactly, you're right, you had no idea, right? And it's because they didn't feel comfortable. They didn't feel comfortable because they didn't want to be a burden on the community. It's like, wait, what? No.
Yeah.
So the Science Center has been amazing. They've been one of our preferred partners for the last 5 years, I want to say. They open the doors early for us. So the buses roll up at 9:30. So we get a VIP experience. Right. We fund everything. So Spinato's donated some pizza, brought in some lunch last time at Lath Pavilion right there. So we ran out of Capri Suns though. So the Capri Suns were right.
Juice boxes.
Juice boxes, right?
Next year, now you know.
So we do that with the Arizona Science Center. Okay. We also do focus field trips. I'm on my soapbox.
Go for it, man.
Go for it.
So we also do focus field trips with Arizona Science Center. So a lot of schools, especially ones who may be in Yuma or Flagstaff, like, hey, we'd love to participate, but getting transportation, for 2 hours there and back just isn't possible.
Sure.
So what Arizona Science Center does is they have a mobile van, and they've gone down to some of our partner schools in Tucson, and they host assemblies. Exactly.
Yeah.
So they'll do the experiments right on campus, and they bring the kids anywhere from 30 to I think 250 is the max that we've had down there. And they'll do a couple hours or a half day or full day of science experiments down there. And we provide that. That's all part of our funding. We underwrite that because we just want that experience made.
Now, speaking of funding, how can organizations, people, individuals, companies, whatever, how can they help if they get inspired by what you're doing? Is there a way for them to help? Do you do fundraising on top of the program with tax credits, or how does that all work?
Yeah, so our main fundraising is through the Arizona tax credit, education tax credit. So right now is the big push for individuals. So we are actually, my wife and I are just looking at ours to make our donation before our tax person gets on us, shaking that finger and everything else. But it's the most generous. So there's kind of 4 major tax credits. And I'm not sure if you gentlemen are familiar or not, but within the state. So, and it's just the way that state, I'm a native, and my brother lives in Massachusetts, and they fund things differently there. It's just the way that Arizona chooses to fund things. But it's one of the most generous tax credits that an individual and couples can make as well. So a married couple filing jointly, it's approximately $2,900 that you can make, and that's a dollar for dollar tax credit.
Impactful.
So you don't have to necessarily owe the state. Exactly, it's very impactful.
You get the money right back directly.
You get the money back no matter what, right? And if you're using TurboTax or your own software, you just kind of put it in the software, then you see it go from either red to green, or the green just kind of grows a little bit more. It happens automatically. So bravo on the state. They made it super easy, and really with corporations. So that's where the lion's share of our donations have come from the corporate insurance premium tax and the corporate income tax.
Okay.
Is there a chance for companies, others, to give you money on top of tax credit stuff?
Absolutely.
Yes, you do some fundraising along those lines too?
We don't do that. No.
Okay.
No. So we don't really do any auctions. We don't do any galas or events.
Okay.
Back to my experience, Don, it was running a team 5, all right, where lean and mean is kind of how do we allocate our resources. Sure. And the big galas are great and they're fun and everything else, but they can be exhaustive and they can really suck a lot of resources as well.
Big events.
So,
but you know, business development though, some people have business, they don't do events, but they just do good solid, calls and campaigns and stuff like that. I just think if more companies heard what you're doing, that you may have an opportunity to find some healthy donations that could come in the door.
Yeah, we've got Jess is on our team on our marketing and business development side.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so she's on there full time and bringing in new donors.
Oh, she is. Okay, that's
great. Yeah. Because it was obtainable and it was just me for a little bit, but once you start having to do more and more, it's nice having a solid team. So yeah, very fortunate to having a great team.
That's fantastic. So what's the plans for the future? More growth?
I think just more growth. Yeah, we've continued to grow year over year, and that's always music to my ears.
Sure.
It was nice to be able to double your growth, when you go from 500,000 to $1 million, but we did 4 so far, and you can still donate if you're listening there. There's still, so the state actually puts on the corporate tax credit, they put a limit on it. So they put a limit of about $135 million this year, which went live July 1st. So that's when the state's fiscal year is. So there's about another 3 months, and there's still about another $33 million as of the beginning of the
still
month
available
that corporations can still take advantage of.
Good.
Correct. Yeah, which is nice. So if you're listening out there, you can go to AOA360.org. You can click on the corporate donor. It's a simple 1-page form. Shockingly, I know we've all kind of been around for a little bit. Shockingly, the state, kudos to the state. They made it very simple and easy. It's a one-page doc that we submit on behalf of the corporation.
Okay.
We get approval back within 5 business days. And then once we get approval, the corporation submits the donation directly to us. And then we get those funds allocated.
Does the corporation do it off their own tax deal? They have a special corporate tax credit rate, or is it all by individuals in the corporation?
Great question. And I don't know how deep you want to get into this.
Just kind of 50,000 foot.
I'll lead with, I'm not a CPA, so contact your CPA and everything else as well. But yeah, so it's C Corps. So we have a lot of large C corporations. So Cigna Healthcare, United Healthcare, Knight Transportation, Sprouts. We've had a lot of U-Hauls in there. We've had a lot of good, large corporations. But as you know, Arizona is comprised of a lot of small businesses. So if you're filing as an S Corp, as you mentioned there, Don, as well. So if you have a small business and you file as an S Corp, so whatever is passed through to you as an individual, absolutely. Okay. So just game it out. If you and Kevin made $100 million this year doing the podcast, right? Extremely successful.
Yeah, we're close.
Right. So you could chop that liability up 50-50 and make that donation.
That makes sense. Okay.
So the state, once again, has made it surprisingly simple and easy, because it does. A lot of people hear this and they're like, wait a minute, it makes sense, because education, unfortunately, has always ranked at the bottom on a nationwide level. Always. It has, and it consistently has, and it doesn't matter. I'm a big fan of the March, the Red for Ed and everything else as well. And then you read the state audit report a couple years later, and then you talk to teachers and you're like, wait a minute, classroom sizes still continue to increase, right? Yeah. Wages really haven't kept up. They've improved, right? And there's been a light shine on it, but I still think there's a long way to go.
What's so cool is that, we talk about education initiatives, and we all talk about how Arizona is lacking. And so whenever we talk about education stuff, it's always heartwarming, but you don't think about this very specific niche which you are addressing with kids that don't have opportunities, who have special needs and who have extra burdens on them that makes their learning impeded.
Exactly. And it's kind of the worst of two courses of collision, where you have funding either decreasing or class sizes increasing. And then you've got, as you said, this distinct niche, which is actually growing. The community of children being linked in having diagnosed with autism, ADHD. I'm not a doctor. I just look at the numbers and what's coming in from our application size. The need is growing. As you mentioned, if the capacity to help and give is not there, then we're encountering some real issues here. So we're thankful of Arizona to have these programs around that really are like, all right, here's $135 million that can go towards that, those kiddos and those parents who can actually tap in and utilize those. So yeah, I'm just grateful to even be involved in this and have this help come on my radar.
Great organization doing worthy causes. As we kind of wind down toward the end of our pod here, share with us, if you can, some success stories, some things that you've seen that have really warmed your heart with the work that you're doing.
Yeah, most recently, just a couple weeks ago at the Arizona Science Center, it was getting that feedback from the administrator saying our parents never even felt welcome.
Yeah.
And not to hammer home the Science Center, but it was believe in what you want to believe in, but it was kind of the universe aligned and everything else. But it was our first field trip at Arizona Science Center. And this was about 4 years ago that we did it, where we hosted, I think it was 150 kids from about 6 different schools that came. And this is our first dry run. So we have name tags on. And of course, we're running around trying to be as professional as possible. But like, what are we really doing? Like, some donors are coming in. We got to show them to know, we're on point and everything else. And all of a sudden, a parent comes up to me and goes, "Are you Mrs. Bays' son?" And I'm like, wait, what? She's like, I had your mom at Eagle Mountain, 20 years ago or whenever it was. I'm like, yes, holy smokes, and he got a little emotional. You kind of look up and you're like, holy cow, so it all resonated. So that was a really cool moment. But she was there. It came full circle, and so that was like 4 years ago.
That's a great
so
story.
We continue to have those. And now we host those events twice a year and everything else as well. So it is. We get, every time we do tours of our schools and we're involved in there, it's just, you see, I think a lot of us growing up, and when you get bogged in with corporate America and your daily grind, it's what are we really doing here? Kind of like searching for purpose and, buying some cool white shoes and black shirt is nice and everything else as well. But actually kind of validate like your time and what you're doing. That's been huge. And that I've been fortunate to be able to do that for the last 10 years.
Well, Chad, we ought to just thank you for the great work you're doing for people who really need a little bit of a hand, which is amazing. And the work you're doing needs to be, Kevin and I are thrilled to have you on here and talk about this because it's right in line with the good stuff we look at people in Scottsdale doing all the time. And you have a statewide impact, but it's awesome, man. Congratulations.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I think, Chad, I think your mom would be proud of you, man.
I appreciate
your
that.
mom would be real proud of you.
Yeah.
You bet.
Don, are we ever going to get exhausted of guests telling great, impactful stories about Scottsdale?
Never. We're going to just have to do this for the rest of our lives.
I guess.
So let's live a long life because we got a lot of stories to tell.
We have a lot of stories to tell, and it's just another great day to tell a good story.
Absolutely. And Chad was a great example of that. Chad, thank you so much for being here today and for all that you do.
No, I appreciate it, gentlemen. Enjoyed it.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We hope you share our podcast with all your friends and check us out at our website, scottnow.com. See you next week for another episode of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale.